I've been cooking with Enigma for about a week now, and I have some thoughts to share with you guys. I'm sure in a month from now my thoughts on a lot of this is going to change, but this is the starting point that I've been using to evaluate how to deck build with her and how to evaluate the cards in the deck. So first of all, as I see it, there's 4 different schools of thought of how to play Enigma. Number 1, protect the one thing that you have with your life. Protect it, no matter what, doesn't die. So you just like block with your whole hand every turn, try to keep that one thing around, keep getting free value out of that aura that you have. Number 2, maybe we fight over the thing we have. You're okay letting the thing die, and you just replace it with a new thing. You kind of see what the texture of your hand is, and you kind of decide what's going on based on what your opponent's doing and the texture of your hand. This, I think, comes up more often when you're playing more of the non-blocks in the deck, because it's kind of hard to fight over your stuff when you're filling your deck with instants that don't block. Number 3, try to hit a critical mass of enough ward in play that your opponent cannot possibly clear all of it, and you try to snowball the game off of it. And number 4, my favorite. My all-time favorite. You know I love it. Spectra. Not much to say there. You slap some auras in play. You bonk your opponent with Iris or Refractor, and they have to trade their action point for your action point to kill them. Now, there's no reason that you can't do more than one of these schools of thought with the deck and how you're playing the game. I think a lot of times you're probably going to be mixing like 2 of these in how you're playing, but I think going into deck construction, kind of considering how you want to play your games, really dictates how you should be deck building around it, because you don't want to just like throw random cards in the deck that you think are good, but then none of them fulfill any sort of coherent strategy. You really want to consider what you're doing with the game before you sit down to play the game, and that's how you're going to deck build. This is what I like to call playing with a plan, which is part of something that I'm actually going to be throwing in a later YouTube series of kind of teaching how to play the game. It's going to be my Patreon at some point. You guys can check that out there at some point. It's not up yet. Anywho, based on how you want to play the game, that's going to change how you build your deck. For example, if you would like to play plan 1, where you protect the thing with your life, you're not going to want to fill your deck with lots of non-blocks. Whereas if you're trying to play more of a critical mass style, maybe you want to just fill your deck with like lots of ward cards so you can just like vomit ward onto the table every single turn. And if you're playing one of the strategies that's more focused around chi, then you're going to have to think about how are we flipping these chi and make some real considerations on your blues. I think really scrutinizing your blues is a big deal for Enigma, especially if you're playing the chi version. A lot of the blues that you can play in the deck, honestly, they're doo-doo. They don't do what you're trying to do, or they don't fill your cost curve, or they just are anti-synergy or just don't work with what you're trying to do. For example, Manifestations of Miragai, probably one of the best auras in the deck, just math-wise. It does not work if you're trying to use that as the thing to flip your chi, because you're going to need a chi to pay to play it if you're trying to do that, meaning we're already past the point that I needed to flip the chi that I'm trying to play. You know what I'm trying to say? Like, it just, I'm trying to play this after I've already flipped my chi, so I can't use this as my enabler to flip the chi. Another example of that is the Spectra auras. The Spectra don't really work as a means of flipping your chi, because it's going to eat up your action point. The exception being if you're willing to play one of your blue Spectra cards and then use your chi on the new Boots Meridian Pathway, and then potentially play out more auras after that. But you can't just like play Spectra and then use that as the way to flip your chi unless you're fine just converting your chi into 1 defense, and that's not really that great, to be honest. I found pairing chi with another chi is honestly the easiest way to flip them, but you can't always do that. You know, if you set a chi, it might be a while before you find another one, and maybe you're playing a list that's not playing like max chi because you don't want to be drawing these all the time, so then it's even more likely that you do that. So finding blues that enable this kind of strategy is very important. The zero cost Go Again Mystic cards I found are really good for this, as well as Levels of Enlightenment. I think Levels of Enlightenment is probably one of my favorite ways to do it. It actually opens up a couple cute lines, like you can pitch a blue to play Levels of Enlightenment, then use your Tunic counter to cast the Mystic Art, and then you get the chi back into your hand, you pitch that chi into your hero ability. We still haven't resolved levels yet. And then we get the shield into play off of our hero power. Now we choose our modes on Levels of Enlightenment. It's going to see that I pitched another blue, so we're going to get 2 effects off of it. as well of course, the resolving of the effect of our Mystic Art. Playing defensive blues on your opponent's round is another great way to do this, since that's still going to be considered playing a card, but there aren't as many that are at a good rate. Hold the Line is probably the best if you're playing into a deck that's going to trigger that. Finding ways to actually get good rate out of these defensive blues, it's going to be a little difficult, but that does work. Similar to Manifestations of Miragai, Rage Spectre is another blue that's just a very good rate on the card. I think that's one of my other favorite ways to actually flip these chi, because you just pitch a blue, play the Rage, you swing, you get your action point back because theoretically you don't have a board, and then you can use your chi to activate your hero power and swing with that shield afterwards. Plays on a nice small hand. I think a lot of it is trying to find ways to do this on small hands where you're not constricted to these chi cards only work on 4 or 5 card hands. I'm really not a fan of using most of the other instant speed ward auras though to enable flipping my chi, since the value on them is really bad with Cosmo because of how the damage is going to scale based on the amount of ward they have. So I'm getting just a very below rate card whenever I'm playing these. Speaking of value though, how am I evaluating these ward cards? So my first pass evaluation of all of them, I did something very similar to how I evaluated the dragons in Dromai. In Dromai, I would look at it as, okay, if I play this dragon and pay exactly the cost of playing this dragon, so if it's a 1 cost, I'm pitching a full card to play it. I'm not considering any extra floating resources from anything else, just nope, I play a Kyloria and I pitch a card, and I do nothing else with these cards. How much am I getting on offense and defense with the card? So again, Kyloria, I'm getting 4 on offense, and theoretically, if it gets attacked for exactly its health total, I get 2 on defense, so it's a 2-card 6. I have upside there, where if it sticks around for longer, or it gets its hit effect, sure, I could get more value. Or they attack it for more than its HP total, I get more value. But just, it's base, it's 4, it's 2, I'm getting 6 out of 2 cards. That is how I'm evaluating a lot of these auras as well. Let's take, for example, Waxing Spectre. I play that, I pitch a blue, it attacks for 4, it prevents 3 damage with its ward. I got a 2-card 7 with Go Again, which is good value. If you don't understand kind of how to evaluate the value of cards in this game, generally you're trying to get at least 3 points of value per card. So in this scenario, we spent 2 cards, we got 7, so 3.5 and an action point out of 2 cards. That's good value. Now, the next thing with how I'm evaluating the different auras is potential anti-synergy that they might have with each other or with other cards in my deck. The ones that don't have Go Again, such as Essence of Ancestry, those clash with Spectra cards, because now I'm really constraining my action point where I'm filling my deck with lots of cards that I'm trying to use as chain enders, so maybe I don't want to include these together. Similarly, looking at that example again of Essence of Ancestry plus a Spectra aura, there's a lot of auras that actually specify you not having other things in play, either when they enter or die, I believe is the wording of most of them. So you have an anti-synergy with the Spectra cards because theoretically the Spectras will be sticking around sometimes. So when these other cards get their trigger, they're going to see that you still have the Spectra aura in play, so they're not going to work together. Another good example of that is if you're playing Spectra aura with Spectral Manifestations. It specifies you don't have another aura in play and you get 3 counters. So if you're spending 2 cards just to make a shield, that's not very good. Then again, maybe you're fine with that because your opponent's been ignoring your Spectra aura all game. That's a different conversation, but these are things that you should be considering during your deck building process of making sure your cards don't just nombo with each other constantly. Similarly, any of the ones that specify you having a blue in your pitch or something, but they get their value on your opponent's turn, either they get more ward or they get a trigger when they die or something, you got to consider, how are we putting a blue in our pitch on our opponent's turn? Footsteps, that's a great way of actually enabling that. So if you're not playing Footsteps in your deck because you're playing Meridian Pathway, maybe you shouldn't be including a bunch of auras in your deck that specify having a blue in your pitch, because it's not going to work out the way you want it to. You're just not going to find ways to do that outside of activating your hero power, or I guess activating the Meridian Pathway, but that's not a reliable thing to actually have the hand that does that on your opponent's turn. And a big one is going to be considering how the different auras kind of cost curve wise work with the weapon that you're using. Going back to Waxing Spectre, that's got a nice cost curve with the new weapon Cosmo, since it's a 2 cost and you're going to have 1 float afterwards by pitching a blue. you can use that on the weapon. But that math is going to change if you're going to change out your weapon. So you really got to kind of consider how your auras work with the weapon that you're using. And let's say, for example, we're playing a different aura in this scenario. We're playing like Waning Vengeance. Costs 1 to play, going to cost 1 to swing, so you're going to have 1 float afterwards. And so, like, what are you doing with this extra float? Maybe you throw something else in your deck that you're trying to play on that turn that's going to cost 1, like maybe a Spears of Surreality or something like that, so that way you're using all of your resources on your turn. I think the real hard one to evaluate is all of the action cards that have ward that do not have go again. There's a number of those in the set, and the intent behind most of them seems to be that you play it and they protect you, and maybe they'll get like a trigger where when they die they get something, or maybe there's a hope that you get to keep it going into the next round. I think those are a little dubious to use. The best ones in my mind out of that cycle of action auras, I think, are the 3-block ones. I think those are really nice because, you know, a lot of the times you're just going to want to fill your deck with some cards that block. That's a good place to look, the 3-block auras. And then something nice that you can do there is if you have extra cards at the end of your turn, like your opponent didn't hit you hard enough to make you block with your cards, or they just took an off turn or something like that, their hand just wasn't very good, you swing out with your auras that have go again, and you still have this afterwards. You intended to block with this, but they didn't make you block with it. I guess I'll play it at the end of my turn, kind of similar to what you would do with a Spectra aura. And then what's nice about that is it's going to help you fight over the auras that you still have in play from the previous round that your opponent wasn't able to clear. So now it's even harder for your opponent to clear, kind of playing into that core strategy of snowballing the amount of ward auras that you have in play. You could also play towards a round where instead of like, oh, you didn't make me block with it, it's like, okay, I'm going into an empty board. I'm just going to play some auras here that, like, I'm going to attack with them, play them, whatever, and then I'll end on this and then set a D-react or something, and now I'm just like, I'm in my fortress and it's impossible to break through all the stuff that I have. Out of them, though, I think my favorites are the 0-cost ones, just like Spectra. It's just easy to play at the end of your round, but I think you could consider the ones that cost more than 0 if it fits the cost curve of what you're doing. Again, it's really important to consider the cost curve of what you're doing. For example, if the turn that you're trying to play on average is only going to cost 1 resource, maybe you can consider playing the ones that don't have go again but cost 2. It's actually going to fit what you're doing, because otherwise you're wasting resources by not using them there. Now, on to equipment. First of all, there's a nice budget option with the deck if you want to go with this. I think that's really nice, and it's actually pretty good. I don't think it's embarrassing playing this setup. You can play Diadem, you can play Kimono, you can play Wave of Reality. You just start squatted up with a lot of ward, and then you play a bunch of stuff, and it's like, hey, it's going to be really hard to break through all this, and even if you do, I'm going to get some free value out of it and try to continue the snowball. And if your opponent isn't able to punch through what you have and actually get through your armor early on in the first couple rounds, you kind of generate a lot of value, making your snowball even easier to do. I think it's actually pretty decent, and it's something that you should consider, especially if you're playing on a budget. The more interesting spot to look at, though, is definitely the boots. You have a lot of options that change what you can do with the deck with your boots. The first obvious one, Footsteps. It's the OG, it's what we've always had. It's not necessary in the deck. A lot of what you're doing isn't throwing Phantasm attacks. Obviously, if you put more Phantasm attacks in your deck, you're going to want to consider that, but it's not necessary. I think a lot of the times it's like a role filler to help you get that blue into your pitch, like I mentioned earlier, so that way you can get some triggers, or maybe you end up blocking with Footsteps, you have an instant speed aura that just kind of fits, like, oh, I just have some extra resources, so I'll just play it in my opponent's turn instead, because I'm going to waste the resources if I did it on my own turn, so I'll just get the 1 extra value by blocking my Footsteps, play the aura after they've finished their turn, go back to my turn, continue what I was doing as normal. Meridian Pathway is a card that I'm honestly very excited about. I can't wait to actually get some more games in with this card, because I'm obviously a big Prism Aura fan, and this enables a strategy very similar to what OG Prism used to be able to do, of being able to double aura your opponent with Spectra auras. It is significantly more difficult to do in this because you just have less Spectra auras than you did in Prism. But I still think it's very powerful, and the rate on it is better than what it would be to do that in Prism, because in Prism, you're spending 4 to play one of those auras, where this, you're spending 3. And you do still technically retain your action point after everything is said and done, because you're playing them all as an instant. Unless you're opening on a Spectra aura to flip the chi to enable yourself to do it. And the fact that it has Ward 3 after everything's said and done, it's pretty sweet. So if you're able to do any of this on your opponent's round instead, like you just already had the Chi card, or maybe you drew double Chi with a Spectra and Arsenal and you drew into another Spectra that turn, you know, the slight magical Christmas land. But these things happen. Like, you should be aware of these hands and play towards them when you see them. Being able to do that all in your opponent's turn and then just also cash in your boots for 3 value, that's nuts. That's so much value out of your boots. Man, imagine if they made boots that gain action points that blocked for 3. That'd be way too broken. Looking at you, LSS. I'm still complaining about that card. And another boot that I'm not saying that many people talk about, but I think is still very good in the deck, is the classic Mage Master boots. Does a similar impression to the Meridian Pathway, but it's much cheaper, both, you know, financially cheaper because it's a common, but also it's only going to cost you 1 resource, and it's not conditional on what type of resource. It's not going to be Chi that you have to do with it. So you can just do this off of your Tunic counter and put a Spectra into play or something else. And by that something else, you could just put a 1,000-Year Reunion into play off of it. That's a big game right there. Speaking of which, synergies. There's a lot of like little synergies in the deck, and I've spent a lot of time talking about like anti-synergies that the deck potentially has, but you should be aware of like these little synergies that you should play towards as well. Haze Bending plus all of these new ward auras that we have, just every time they ignore the haze bending but kill your ward auras, you just get a spectral shield out of the deal. Shimmers of Silver is pretty nuts in this deck. Like, it's already good in the fact that you get a +1 counter off of it out of the deal every time, but the fact that it enables the go again on your weapon on your first attack every time, so nuts. Phantom Tidemaw and Restless Coalescence, that is one of my favorite synergies in the deck. It's kind of hard to like profitably do this. You need some things to line up, but it's not, I wouldn't say it's magical Christmas land. You have one of these in Arsenal, you have the other one in hand, you wait for your opponent to clear your board, and you play the Tidemaw and it sees everything. And then what you can do is, we have now this Tidemaw that has counters on it. We then play the Coalescence Mirage after swinging with the Tidemaw, move all the counters over the Coalescence Mirage, swing with the Coalescence Mirage, then we can remove the counters from this, you know, once during our turn, once during our opponent's turn, and then make a shield on each of the rounds. Then those shields will die, and the Tidemaw will see those die and get the counters back. So you're like triple dipping on these +1 counters. It's so good. Again, a little hard to set up. You know, you need some things to line up, but that is such crazy value. And honestly, I think Restless Coalescence might be my favorite card out of the entire set. And first of all, the art is nuts on it, but I just love the like little technical plays that you can do with it. It feels so good to play that card. 1,000-Year Reunion. There's some cute little interactions that you can do with that as well. You can use Astral Etchings, Single-Minded Determination, or Spectral Manifestation to create something with 3 counters on it. You know, get your attack in with it, and then you can play the 1,000-Year Reunion, removing those counters, and now you got a Ward 10 in play. Ideally, you probably want to do that with Mage Master boots, so that way, you know, you're not just ending your turn on a Ward 10 and just passing, and then they just like, okay, kill it. You know, that's a big game if you're able to get the full value out of that, and you know, you still got value out of the counters because you probably attacked before that. You know, you pitch a blue, you play Spectral Manifestations, you swing with it. It was free because we're playing Cosmo. We crack boots with the 1 floating that we have, we play the 1,000-Year Reunion, and then we Tunic swing with the 1,000-Year Reunion for 10. That was a pretty good turn. That was, what, a 3-card 14 on offense, and we still have a Spectral Shield and a Ward 10 on the back for defense? It's pretty good. There's definitely more little synergies like this in the deck. I haven't found all of them. You guys should go exploring. See what other little combos you can find in the deck. Let us know in the comments if there's anything that I've missed here that you guys think is worth talking about, worth exploring in the deck, because there's so much going on. Illusionist is a complicated class, and we're going to be finding stuff for a while, I'm sure. Lastly, though, you really need to consider the potential weaknesses of your deck and how to cover for them. Can't be prevented effects is a huge one. This is primarily something you're going to see out of Assassin and Ranger, since they have the cards like Malign that just, you can't do anything about that. It just says damage can't be prevented on this attack. Vincent has it on their hero power, Ninja has that on Shuko, and of course everyone can play Vambrace. These effects heavily punish you for stacking multiple ward auras. The only counterplay you really have to this is just blocking it with actual cards. Defense reactions are really important for this though, since a lot of the times your opponent's going to try pairing this with an attack reaction to push over your block value, so you really want to have that defense reaction ready to fight over their attack reaction, and that way you don't lose all of your stuff. Another way is just not fighting over it as much by leaning heavier into spectral shields, and specifically one spectral shield at a time. If you just have like a ward 1 in play and your opponent plays one of these effects, it's not backbreaking when your opponent kills your board and you can't prevent the damage, compared to like if you had like 5 different ward effects on the table and they just blow you out and you lose like 15 value or something because you couldn't fight over it because your hand didn't block. Another major weakness of the deck is damage in multiple small packages or just kind of hard to block packages. Ninja and Assassin are a great example of this, since it's lots of like instances of like small 1/1/1 kinds of damage, or sneaky damage that you didn't expect and couldn't really easily play around, such as attack reactions and things like that. Again, on the reactions, defense reactions are going to be your best friend there. But for the small instances, Restless Coalescence, Battlefront Bastion, Dense Blue Mist, and Quell are some easy access effects that you can have to help you play around these different things. Again, Restless Coalescence, I love the card. It just does so many role filler things in the deck. So to summarize of what you should be thinking about when you're sitting down to deck build with Enigma. First, math out the ward and the value that it makes to see if it makes sense with the cost curve of what you're trying to do with the specific weapon you're using. Number 2, scrutinize your blues and make sure they work with the strategy that you're doing and the other cards in your deck. And lastly, have a plan to cover the potential weaknesses of your deck. If you guys have any questions and there's anything that you think I've missed here, throw in the comments below. I'll get back to you guys as soon as I can. There's a lot to cover with this complicated hero. I'm going to be posting some deck profiles in the next week or so of Enigma using everything I've talked about here, so make sure you guys are subscribed and stay tuned for that. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you.